Please welcome with me Nils Marquardt, Samira Al-Kassir, Stefan Niggemeier, and Friedemann Karig. Microphone is on. Thank you very much. Thanks for being here. To the half. Okay, it seems to more. Maybe it's a good sign. The Republic starts on the first day at 11 with a very deep opening panel, and on the other stage there's a keynote, and so it maybe feels to you like okay.
We're happy to see that the hall is very full, and it's not always easy because the topic and the announcement of this panel leaves room for questions. I've brought a few questions about what it might be about here. First of all, who was these people from the 1968 revolution? It's a little like a basketball team. What do they have to say? How did they change the society? What stayed from the power to the people, which is also the POP stands for? And is 1968 as a label just POP nowadays because it's become from content to surface, and surface as on content, does it work? Is Republica maybe just pop and we sit down there and discuss digitalization and drink beer on the court with our philosophers and our stars and our running gags, and at the end we sing, and maybe that we've become pop culture too. What's the difference between pop and populism? What's the new right? Are they actually new? Haven't they been around for much longer? Have they landed with a spaceship? Why are they so successful? What is propaganda and what is propaganda? We will be talking about this guaranteed without puns. I welcome these three people. Stefan Niggemeier, he's the founder of the very famous portal Die Übermedien, and very famous as a media critic, and one of the luckily very mellow voices in the sea of so welcome anyway, Stefan Niggemeier. Sorry, it's very, very fast. Next to me is Nils Marquardt. He writes smart and precise text for the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung and the magazine and the philosophy magazine, and maybe nobody has publicistically accompanied the new right better than him in the last few years. So welcome, Nils Marquardt. And then on my right, Samira Al-Ghazil, and then will be some nouns. Author, ghostwriter, singer, actor, synchronous voiceover actor, and former candidate for chancellorship. So welcome, Samira. We can see if we talk about 1968. I can't ask anybody of you where you were in 1968 because you weren't born in 1968. But Niels, first question to you, because you intensely thought about how 1968 still has an effect on today. Can you finger point this? You have to see that 1968 is a projection because for a long time we talked about 67. We agreed on 1968 much later, and a lot what we talk about in 1968 is started in the early 60s, like Auschwitz trials and Dahrendorf and all these kind of things. And there's a lot of myth building there, and a lot of things happened very earlier. When you ask yourself what stays from 1968, we're talking about the liberalization of the German society, and I would pinpoint that there. Politically, 1968 failed, but culturally it didn't. So the cultural dimension is a very strong one, and also talking about gender relationships and so on. And we can talk about if the new right would, without putting this all into one pot, but the question is if there's stuff coming back. We know from 1968. We will talk about the new right a little more. Stefan Niggemeier, if we talk about 1968, and we were talking about building a leftist opposition to the conservative mainstream. If you have a look at what Bild-Zeitung talked about, especially like after the G20 in Hamburg. Are the enemies still the same? Has there anything changed in the last 50 years? No, I don't think so. I wouldn't say that the enemies, that's not the point, that the enemies are the same. The Bild has come back to this point. So it fits that Bild still creates opinion and still has too much power, in my opinion. But it's not the Bild-Zeitung from back there. I've got a lot of criticism towards Bild-Zeitung, but it's not the same as 50 years ago. And G20 and how the way Bild-Zeitung created an atmosphere, and it's. You can't compare it to the whole climate of opinion back then. Also, back then the Springer building was attacked, and so the opposition today against them is today you have the Bild blog, for example. So you don't really stand in the Rudi-Dutschke-Straße with Molotov cocktails, but. Are you used to it? Is the opposition that different? Or yes, this was a motivation from us for maybe 15 years ago to found Bild blog. The feeling that there's an acceptance and not being outraged about it anymore. That this feeling has come into the population. So. I don't have any attachment to 1968 and the demonstrations back there, not emotionally. But I grew up with Günter Wallraff, who was I was raised with Günter Wallraff, who publicistically criticized Bild, and this criticism had stopped, and Bild-Zeitung. Isn't the same as then, but it's still back, and it's back in mainstream. And every politician and every celebrity says, "I need Bild-Zeitung. I need to work with them." And there's a lot of them who just say, very few of them who say, "I don't talk to them at all." So, Maria, how do you see this?
Is the protest of 1968? We arranged it with it and with the Bild-Zeitung, and very few opposed that. What brought people to the streets? Why is our generation? Why have we so little revolutionary potential? Why don't we get masses on the streets anymore? I think the process of the politicization. Everyone has very own singular interests, and the society is more fragmented. There's less mass movements, and that are bound by ideology. And the things that have been big and important for the German society, democratization, education, and what we can see a political motivation is the net and net-related politics, and this is a thing where large groups come together and in small tribes try to create a political identity and to fight for something or against something. And one needs to say, we want to say we don't have any utopia anymore. You can't forget that most of the protests of 68 were on the background that they thought they were in a fascistic country. And a lot of the texts were written in the 40s and 20 years later. And they just said every freedom they have is just not real. And the state was fascistic, and the Rote Armee-Fraktion was opposing to that, and that needs, you can't forget that if you do the analysis there, and that's important to understand the identity of the 68ers gave themselves.
I think the importance is, there was in the left and the middle, there was they were relaxed, and there was no importance there. At least not in the left and the middle. There were a couple of voices who said, "Yeah, you need to do something," But there was, but it was okay. The consensus was pretty much like it's okay, but it was really paralyzing. But is this true to you? Like that you say it's all great, these and that, Bild-Zeitung and FDP are okay, but well, if you say that like that, but I can't really say yes. But I have a couple of topics where I get enraged, like discrimination of gay people or trans people. This is a topic, for example, that really makes me emotional a lot. But I noticed that that you have to really alert people, and that doesn't work, because the topic trans, for example, is that counts as a popular topic right now, and people attack this because they've reached everything else, and now we talk about niche topics. I think this is wrong, but it's really hard to get behind that. But then the feeling mixed in that it's okay for the majority, and now we don't have to take care of all these very few discriminated minority. But this mixes into the topics where I at some point say I have the urgency. One of the topics from this book about the 68 people was one that the topic of permanent moralization. It's just a descriptive, empiricistic topic. In the internet, we have permanent moralization and permanent reflection on steroids, and the identity isn't created of our milieus or heritage, but it's constantly created. And the question is, the point is that the modernity has become really very complex, and it's not that easy to fight for the right thing. It's not also that point, but the loss of protest has also come with a loss of religiosity. The large portion of the 68 people grew up very Christian Protestant, and Dutschke said,
and most of them came from Christian households, and they had this political hardware where they just need to apply new software. So what showed in their political activism was prefigured by this Protestantic ethic. Are we maybe, thank you, maybe a bit too comfortable, too lazy, too clever to believe in most of the myth of the protests? Niels, if you like. I think there's more reflexivity in higher grades, and that's maybe on the one hand, it's good because then you can see the things that the 86ers, 68ers, sorry, couldn't see, and the holiness that Dutschke and Meinhof had, that doesn't exist anymore, and that's positive, I think, because we reflect more, and we lose the urgency because we're thinking on the meta level, and yeah, it would sound very pathetic today if we talk like Dutschke, and because he had some kind of sacral things, and I think that changed. And yeah, maybe as the president, you are allowed to speak. So you need to check two things there against each other. We're in the post-ironic age, and that's for the very attractive for the right wing, the pathos, the pain, the tragedy, the tragic heroes that doesn't really exist in the modern narrative anymore. And second is how satire is dealing with that. And in the past, you need to distance yourself ironically and know there's a gap. And some people really have a longing for this gap and want to have this ironic thing. Markus von Meyer, the chair of the Junge Alternative, the youth organization of the AfD, said 2 years ago, two and a half years ago, we are the Sex Pistols of our generation. We are the 68ers of our generation. Do you think he means with that this revolution and rioting is changed from left to right? I think that's a mistake, and the revolution wanted to produce a more liberal society, and the radical thing connects left and right, but the lefts perceive the society as a shapeable entity, and the right wing they have a different perception of the society. They want to create natural things you can relate to. And the second thing is the 68ers are very, very inclusive. They try to they try to close the gaps in the society, and using pop music, for instance, and concerts and rock and roll, and they want to bring society back together. And the right wing is not trying to do that. They try to crack open these cracks. And so I don't think this analogy is correct. Well, the FD says they do what power to the people means. They give a voice to the silent majority, the people, and since they in the Bundestag now, they give these people more might on the institutional level. Yeah, so it's right that the FD said the right-wing democracy and the party perceives, at least parts of the party perceives themselves as the democratic wing of this movement, and they try to continue there. But the interesting part is that this can't really work, at least not if they still want to be conservative. And the conservatism has this anthropological base that people are sinful, and that's why he needs tradition, the church, and a strong state to be cared for. And that's basically the basso continuo of the conservative thought. And they well, if you speak of superior races, then you go to the fascism way and Hobbes and Evenberg. then you have to be very skeptical that masses are very skeptical against large change, and
this is a basic paradox. For example, Gauland, for example, says that his picture of a human is skeptical and image of human, and it doesn't work that you can't just have as a movement and have this skeptical image of humanity, and this with a conservative image you can't demand democratization in the way the AfD asks for, and you can't do it as a movement either. Stefan, you wanted to say something? Yes, but there's also different movements within the AfD. There's part conservatives and there's also others who want a different republic. It's not, you shouldn't drink their Kool-Aid and don't just believe that it's the 68th from today, but it's a difference if you're for liberation and liberalization and enlightenment, but it's also very luring and attractive that there's a few things that are taboo and that aren't done for good reasons, and we worked a lot to reach these taboos, and it's very attractive now to stand up as these people and say we don't believe in these taboos. We're saying these things, and now you have the spirit of revolution, and it's very attractive and liberating for those people. It's not so liberating for the victims, of course, but first of all, I understand that it's very attractive, and to say that, yeah, you don't want that, we put the finger in the wound there, but not to giving you the card of the victim, but can you maybe say what was in your letterbox in the next morning after the general election in Germany? So in the morning after the AfD got into the Bundestag, I woke up and because of my phenotype and for my gender, my ethnicity, and my confession that I don't have my political ideology that I have, depending on what I have, I'm very much a projection for. I am used to getting a lot of hate mail from these kind of people, and also being the chancellor's candidate for the satirical party Die Partei. At 6 p.m. the election results came in, and everything was over, and flood of triumph and ridicule that came upon me, because the content was just full of hate and despicability and dehumanization of my person. In the subtext, I just thought they didn't think that they're working with a really breathing human, but with just an idea. And the more interesting part where I just read a bitterness and satisfaction, and finally having won, and they was talking about victory, and we were like, finally we've done it. We're getting this back, and the same as Gauland said, that we're getting our country back. And the worst ones are, you're going to be burned, and you will be thrown on the garbage heap of history. You will be drowned. But it's so much over the top that I don't really take this personally. But this bitterness was that got to me, because there's so long it has built up this frustration and anger, and the feeling that living in a society that doesn't honor them this led to them in the election night writing me like, ha ha ha, I won against you, and go away. So the person, humans always seek validations and acceptance, and this feeling of permanent frustration, and on professional level, on personal level, on economic level, maybe it's also boredom, and without being despicable, the people have a lot of time, and they fill this boredom with a vacuum, and these people who feel not respected enough look for scapegoats, and start feeling again like a normal person, and if they can send a person something destructive. But our task is not only in the internet politics, but generally is to create a situation where the people don't need the scapegoat anymore and feel like a part of the society. So I think we had to talk about the topic about globalization losers, but it's more the losers of the liberalization. And while liberalization has changed things and changed taboos, broken up taboos, given minorities this equal rights, this has also created the feeling within a lot of people that in the new world that is based on moral principles and parity, there is not enough space for them, or no space for them, and it creates this exclusion for them. So and then this in turn creates the total aggression for within these people, that we stand next to it and don't know what to do. Well,
okay. If you want to try to explain AfD and other right-wing populists, it's not that easy. There has been a study of the Institute of Wirtschaft in Cologne, and voters of the AfD earn more than the German average. So it doesn't really is right that they're not losers of liberalization, and there are a lot of people with their doctor degrees, and the TV show Anneville, there was a woman, and she was the counterpart to Dr. Sarrazin, and she received a lot of letters with gold letters and everything. So one point in the right thought is affection and emotionality is play a large role, and it's not post-facted, it's pre-facted, and it's irrational, and they search for transcendence to something larger, bigger, higher, and this critique on the liberalism is very that the liberalism is very rational, and with just exchanges, and they have the longing to do something emotional and to let everything out, and I think that plays a big role. That right-wing parties are well, basically licensing these effects. May I surely say something to the better educated and better situated persons that vote the AfD? The socially hanged Bude talked about milieus that some people that live in very bourgeois milieus and live in the family and still approach the AfD, and he picked some kind of well, sickness. Persons feel a bit like disparate against the politics, and they have the feeling they lost control, and this control led them to let's vote for a party that really takes things in her hands and everything will be good again, and to validate themselves and to empower themselves a bit and feel better. And that's a very interesting aspect, and that can also reach persons that have an academic grade, and this are all things that are not really exclusive to. Okay, let's. Sorry, Stefan, we need to talk about Matthias Matosek here. We need more beer. We need a lot of beer here. I want to talk about Tiki's view on this publicistic, very fascinating. If you look at the anger that's in there, and you can analyze anything, and what are they fighting for? And please say some names who you are speaking on. This is Tiki's Einblick is the internet portal of Roland Tichy from Wirtschaftswoche, or former Wirtschaftswoche. Matthias Matosek is publishing there. Vera Längsfeld is publishing there. The Achse des Guten, it's a blog as well. It's a right-wing milieu. What's really fascinating me in this is how they manage to keep this anger up, because they're not this classical Wutbürger, anger people, and they are this cultural, but they are not really classic this, and probably they have the feeling, why I have to justify myself because I'm an old white male. But if you read that, every article they write, there's a lot of anger there against Angela Merkel, for instance, every day, again, and they describe the country as a country that's really dissolving itself, and this state is basically not existing anymore, and that's really strange, because I really want to get that and understand that and bring this together with my perception. And I think that's the thing that really goes with left and right, because now the right ones are the ones that say, hey, that we can't keep the status quo because the state is really being destroyed, and the left say, hey, it's okay, let's keep it that way, and that leads to really ridiculous situations, like in Hamburg. That there's a woman in Hamburg at the Jungfernstieg with the sign "Merkel muss weg," Merkel needs to go, which is really harmless. But what then happened? People from the Antifa came there, and they demonstrated against someone demonstrating against the chancellor, which is really strange. And that's just scratching the surface, but still, that's really confusing, one has to say. And that's if you read just through the articles there, they're really people, and that's not the precariat that they really don't get how we can ruin our country. You need to see that the relationship to the institutions really changed from the 68ers. They were against the state and the institutions, and today the institutions are protected by the left wing. And there's this book, Against the Tyranny, related to Trump, and he's really protecting the institutions, and that's really 180 degrees turn. Where are these people coming from? From the rich people that want to have immigrants in the country. Matthias Matosek doesn't want to have immigrants as well if he could choose, and he's very Catholic, but he's the ex-head of cultural section of the Spiegel. Where they are coming from? They didn't come here in the last 15 years or radicalized, so the numbers of hundreds, thousands, or millions. Where have they been? Where have they been? Well, there are two aspects, not really related to Matosek, but often forgets that the history of the right terror, right extremism, because they internet they have.
So between 1971 and today, there was like 2,000 right-wing fire attacks, and there were arsons, and there were like 32 murders and Aktion Widerstand and Bamge and Neumann, and also, I don't know them all, but they were like right-wing terrorists, and they've been more or less forgotten. And the NPD in the 70s and 80s and the Republikaner the Republican Party was, they were also very successful. So the AfD is not coming from nothing. There's also always been a certain tradition, and then there's a lot of converts there, people who used to be left, and then you can say that in movements there's converts who are that converts have a certain believability, and there's a lot of within the right-wing populists, there's a lot of identity, not from what they are, but what they're not. So, for example, a tree is not a tree because it's not a car or a box. And the right, that's the same way that right-wing, the new right works. They say they're not Merkel, they're not liberalism. They have little own program, partially none, and so you see from AfD that it usually used to be a neoliberal party of like professors, and then the advantage is that you can react to things very fast on the market of opinions, and the very strong example is the leader of the Czech right wings, and he was a Japanese, his Japanese roots, and he wanted a multicultural Czech Republic 3 years ago, and now he wants to drag pigs around the mosque, and now Trump was the same, Alexander Gauland was the same, Trump was a Republican, Alexander Gauland was left, but I'm not saying that the ideology is not rooted there, but the success of the right wing has the attention economic dimension that of the non-identity. So I come from Munich. Samira, what if a Markus Söder stands there and says we put a cross in every office in Bavaria and get medially attacked, and everybody knows that it's legally difficult. Is it pop circus theater, or what this politician does, or to get some attention, or what is it? So it's whistleblower communication. It's dog whistling communication. It's a signal to all conservative voters. And in the light of attention economy, he couldn't have done anything better. He got media attention. He mobilized voters from his conservative side, and it was talked about. Jens Spahn does also does the same. He's Minister of Health, but he talks about all the other topics and with populist positions. So the problem is that the loud political sound is generated daily that creates a liquid communication, and the really important topics are muted, more or less. And I recommend that the parliamentarians form a right to not use this kind of communication, because it's not worth it in the long run. Niels, you called Jens Spahn the clownization of the political discourse. Stefan, now you are. Now it's your job as a media critic to create rationality, put rationality or criticism into this media circus. How necessary is it that these kind of people push these buttons in this media circus? Because they exactly know that in social media, so the common people as well as the pros, they will generate within these people very easily controllable outrage cascades. So the same is with Donald Trump, where it's very clear how it works, and the media runs into it with open eye. And every time he creates this thing, they create breaking news, and every unimportant outrage. Everybody is involved. We all are involved with our outrage on Twitter, and we all mirror this what happens on Twitter. So I don't think this is a new phenomenon. You can see it with Donald Trump and all the other examples where this leads, but one great example is we're not glued to people, but individual people. But the same is like how long the public talked about Merkel's sentence, "Wir schaffen das," we can do this, and how long this was talked about, and how much we could have talked in that time. How can we actually achieve this, and what can we do to achieve this? And this is a perpetuum mobile. I would agree to this. I would say, though, that it's difficult to distinguish between provocation and what's a scandal and what is not. And in a liberal democracy, there's things that you can't let them stand, even if they're provocation. For example, this is the problem. For example, in the 90s, Hondrich, a Frankfurt sociologist, wrote a book, Empörung und Entrüstung, outrage and other outrage. This has the function that it stabilizes society. So if no one gets agitated, then you.
And if everything is okay and everyone is indifferent, means on the other side you need to look that you don't jump over every stick that's presented and play with every provocation there, and the idiot, the willing idiot. But on the other side, if there's someone like Gauland, who wants to complains about boycotting a football player who's his neighbor, and that's provocations. Well, that's way too important that we can't really be outraged about that. So that's the thing, the ambivalence you need to see there. Yeah, that's right. And I think it's really hard to judge where do you want to be outraged, what's the function there, and where we say, hey, that's the point where we can't discuss anymore. And I wish from the media that they have arguments there and don't say, hey, we disagree and that's the border, and that Beatrix von Storch is not allowed to say that, but that they really have arguments. Why is that wrong, and why is that why we can have that and just don't let the outrage stand there, and but the outrage has an important function as well. I want to have a remark there. Honrich says if there's an outrage, you have to bring it to an end and have to lead to consequences. If it's just for the media outrage, then that's a problem. I have a remark as well. And there's this concept of the interpassivity. And in sitcoms, someone is laughing instead of us, so that we don't need to feel ourselves laughing. And I think outrage and anger in the internet is a form of participation there. And the people have the feeling that they participate there and they say, hey, that's not okay, we need to Twitter and we need to start a campaign and be outraged, and have the feeling that they are political active, and but they have just been interpressive. And I think that's the problem, that the people really mistake actionism with action. And so we need to really question our own positions there, and that we need to question our reaction to things, and we need to stop ourselves and say, hey, stop, we need to argue about the arguments. Maybe there's something on there that doesn't really fit me. That's why I really like the example of We Can Do It by Merkel. If you look at the press conference back there, I think it was on the 4th September on 2015, on the height of the immigrant crisis, refugee crisis. And in the video that's online, she speaks 1 hour and 45 minutes, and she is giving a monologue, and she really reports what she did and what she talked to the French people, and she's really talking about solutions there, and she's really having bullet points there. That's the things we need to do, and then at some point she really says the sentence, she wishes for the people approach this situation in the spirit of we can do it. So it's really Merkel rhetoric there, really strange sentence, and it's a lot more complicated to deal with the solutions. So the right-wing media was more like the people don't have they don't want to deal with this complicated political speak. They just want to have 3 words, and so do we need to acknowledge that? Yeah, I think I feel that's the point. Of course, we could talk about the media and the mechanisms there, and it's really important. But of course, it's also the laziness of the people, of the. Yeah, I think that's a really great closing word. But we still have 10 minutes, so I'm really interested in Monty Samira. Tell me, how long ago have you been councillor candidate of the party? 2009, and yeah, it was very close, but I didn't won, and yeah, it was Angela Merkel's fault. She was way too strong. So yeah, my slogan back then was a skirt needs to go through, which is a wordplay. Es muss ein Ruck durch Deutschland gehen. Okay, if we look to today, last week, the head satiric of Germany, Jan Böhmermann,
Rechercheteams von Funk, die ein rechtes Trollnetzwerk, die Reconquista Germania,
infiltrated a right-wing troll network with the support of Funk. What happened there? What happened there? That satire is working with journalistic methodology and a defined enemy. I think that's the vacuum of the political participation satire is trying to fill. Short excuse here. Two little leftist intellectuals argue against right-wing intellectuals. On the left side, there's two little people that publish a manifesto or an article or something like that. And I really question myself, who are our leftist intellectuals? We have a lot of artists and such as Trojanov, and there's this vacuum, this gap, and satire is trying to fill that with a new, well, without the laugh. And if you have a look at John Oliver and this impetus to be not enlightened, not to be destructive, more progressive and more constructive, related to the current state of the society. And the last thing is laughter is a form of social judgment, and if you laugh, you reinsure against your own moral and social systems. And now it's like the AfD is they captured the Bundestag, and they use the laughter and against the democratic processes. And that's why the satire says we need to return to a new.
So we can't really be fun and Stahlbart like fun, like to speak like Adorno. We have to enlighten the people first without just having a lot of fun. So the interesting part is that you can see this in Russia, that the irony and laughing and humor play an interesting role in the political power system, a very stabilizing role. Putin rides naked on a bear, and even public Russian channels make fun of the Skripal affair, and Russia Today plays in there and so on, because it's important, because its ironization creates if you anticipate the ironization, you immunize yourself against these kind of things, and it's if you. Like, for example, Putin rides on a bear, you say, like, yeah, it's ironic. And the people who don't have that much attachment to the system, you can catch with this ironicism. And the AfD hasn't caught this yet. But if it happens, it's going to be complicated. Possibly, Republika is going to create a sit-in where a pamphlet from the leftist intellectual part, and they will sit down and create a pamphlet. So, Stefan, in these times, the question is, what is satire allowed to be? What can satire do? Is the more. So we have discussed this, if it's so smart to attack these people with total irony like Böhmermann does. Maybe if these people don't understand this irony and people don't like this, what is allowed? So it's for me. I don't like this to say that satire should or shouldn't do things, and I think this is. I don't know what Böhmermann does is satire. It's very entertaining activism, and maybe journalism. It's not very much satire. It's great. I think it's great if satirists do this. I think it's hard to put it on satire to have this kind of role. So especially if satire comes from the majority, it's important to laugh about these things and to create an exclusion of these people because they're laughable, and satire can do this. I think these times are so exhausting and I find it very exhausting to having to find an opinion everywhere, and I think satire is a great way for me to just find a way to laugh about it. And if it's bad, it's cabaret, and everybody in the audience says haha, and now finally someone says it, and no one is smarter than afterwards. So we talked for almost an hour about problems. So my final question to our both of you: what do you think? What makes you optimistic in the year 2008? And Samira, start.
Okay, it's difficult because how to say. Well, the pessimism of the modern times doesn't need to exclude the optimism. Yeah, you make me optimistic. Niels, is the optimism that what we are ahead of the new right? Optimism is a difficult thing, I think. Thanks. No, I want to say we talked about 68, and there's a kind of dialectic. We talk about AfD politicians that are racist and say racist things, and 10 or 15 years ago we didn't talk about that because it was normal and nobody really recognized and noticed that, and so that's part of the discourse we do, and what kind of society we live. And in the past we just took it as granted because it was normal, and today society is a bit more advanced and we have these debates, and I think we enrage us because we got more critic with the things, so that's the thing. Stefan? Yeah, I think everything the AfD started was, well, they started as well, that people recognize we need to fight for things that are important to us, and well, of course that's way too little, and it's like we talked about, it's really hard how you want to have this, or fight this fight to have a good impact. But if you ask me for optimism, I think it really shook a lot of people awake, and they go to go to the streets and for things that are important to me, and if they are important for our country, then we need to fight for them, otherwise they won't stay. So 50 years after 68, we awake, and yeah, thank you, and have fun with 3 days of Republica.